Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 47 of The Clutch Dump. I am one of your hosts, Nicholas Patty, and I am joined opposite by Ben Walter. We are both wearing our Formula One hats because at the time of this recording, we are just 5 hours and 12 minutes away from the Australian Grand Prix in Melbourne, Australia. Looking fairly good for, the hats we're both wearing. However, we're not covering Formula One this episode.
No motorsports today.
That'll be on Sunday evening, probably. Or we could do Sunday midday and get it out end of day Sunday. Who knows? That's why you got to subscribe to the YouTube and turn on those notification bells. Make sure to follow us on Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Wherever you listen, make sure to go ahead and follow and then like the episode. And if you can, leave a rating or a review. That helps us know what you all want to see more of, what you want to see less of. But what you're going to be seeing plenty of if you're watching on YouTube is Ben and I talking about a particular Volkswagen Group-owned brand, and it's not the one I wish we were talking about.
It's the only one that matters. So, yeah, we're just here to crush Nick's soul, one episode at a time.
When are we going to tell him that Max is definitely going to get taken out by Russell into turn one? When are we going to tell him that?
I hope soon, honestly.
I hope that's what happens and we have a Fernando Lewis duel to the end, and I want Fernando to come out on top.
I'll be honest, I really don't care for Red Bull or to see them win anymore. The hat was free. So, but...
you still had to put it on, my friend.
It was just the closest hat to me when we started recording. There's a Rossi hat, like 3 feet from me. I can almost touch it. I could put that on if it would make you feel better.
I have this one in arm's reach. Do you want it? You can wear this McLaren
No, I'm
Fernando
good, thank
hat.
you.
Okay.
But we're going to record, so we're doing this out of order because this is episode 47.
But 46 hasn't gone live.
46 hasn't happened yet because we're going to do that Monday, and this is going to go up on like Wednesday or something like that because time travel.
I assume what he's saying is correct. I have no insight.
I am also assuming what I'm saying is correct, but I do not know because it's Saturday and not Wednesday.
This might be one of our first Saturday episodes.
Actually, yeah, I don't know if we've ever recorded on
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural Saturday episode. There will be one a year. We'll just choose one Saturday a year.
Yeah. So, and this is not an April Fool's joke. We are going to talk about Lamborghini for the next 30 minutes-ish or so, because I'm just here to torture Nick Patty. But this is actually kind of...
You're doing such a good job.
It's kind of a big deal, though. Like, if you think about it, in the grand scheme of things, in the history of Lamborghini, and the lesser of the two Italian automakers, can we agree on that? It is the lesser of the two?
Well, the fact that you're just narrowing it down to two, I find offensive.
Well, because it's the common question of the two, the horse or the bull, which one? And the horse is the superior.
The snake.
Well, but at one point...
The snake.
Well, yes, but of
snake.
the two, if you want to put in the third, that's fine, but of the two, it is... Anyway, we're doing this episode because we have a new V12 Lamborghini, which is actually exciting, and we don't mean... a new Aventador. We have a new car. It shares...
For the first time in 30 years, we have a new car.
It's actually the only V12 Lamborghini, new model debut that I remember.
I remember the...
You remember the Miura launch, don't you? 3.5 minutes in, we're doing good.
God, 3.5 minutes too many.
Woo! So, since 2011, we have had the Aventador, and it has finally been replaced by the Revuelto.
Thank God.
Which I am going to call it Revuelto because that's what the Lamborghini video said, and that is what most of the videos have said, but some have said it is pronounced Revuelto, which just sounds like Porsche, so I'm gonna call it Revuelto because that's what it is. But yeah, it's kind of a big deal. It's the car. It's the most supercar of all cars to ever supercar because it's the V12 Lamborghini, and they were the first, if you want to call them the first. They weren't technically the first.
Right.
There were 2 or 3 cars before the Miura, but it was it was the most expensive, the fastest car at the time. Whatever. And the cool thing is that it's 2023, internal combustion engines are dying. Everything's going hybrid.
No,
or
Porsche's
E3
just making synthetic
or
fuel,
whatever.
saving the world. Yeah.
I don't know why you're here, but it's cool to me that Lamborghini is like, you know what we need? We need a 9,500 RPM 6.5-liter V12. That's what the world
With
needs.
Duracells plugged into it.
Yes, I cannot wait until we do the episode on the Hybrid 911. But we're going to start with
You mean the 918?
A bit of a history lesson, because you can't talk about Lamborghini without talking about V12s, and you can't talk about the new V12s without talking about all of Lamborghini. So, what? Why did your eyes get so big all of a sudden? What's your problem? What? Okay.
Ah, man, this Folgers is really hitting.
Sure.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat with me as we listen to... I wish we had a cute little segment transition and segment name, so it could be like a history lesson from Professor Ben. And it's like
Something
a little
like
chalkboard, and it's like a kid drawing a stupid-looking car with disproportionate wheels.
Yeah.
And then it's like a jib-jab of your face talking about history. Yeah.
Perfect. That's what we're going to do.
If that's the case, this episode will come out 2024. See y'all then.
Wednesday. I'll just ignore all other responsibilities until Wednesday.
That's basically what I've been doing for the last 4 days. So
that's fair enough. But what would that be? 60 years ago, this year, we had the introduction of the 350 GT, which was the first Lamborghini and
photo here.
Automobile. It was the first Lamborghini automobile. There were tractors before that, but first Lamborghini.
And even their tractors were worse than Porsche's.
Automobile, and it had a 3.5-liter quad cam V12 with 6 carburetors on it, which for the time was nuts. Ferraris were, if they were V12s, they were single underhead cam, kind of traditional. So after the 350 GT, they moved on to the 400 GT, which is just an evolution of it. Obviously 350, 3.5-liter, 400, 4-liter, very simple. And then we were introduced with the Miura in 1966, which is regarded as the first ever supercar. It had that same 4-liter quad cam V12, still a wet sump. They weren't dry sump yet. That was, I don't even know if race cars were using dry sumps yet. Wet sump V12 fitted with 6 2-barrel carburetors. The interesting thing, though, was it was transverse mounted like a front-wheel drive car. At the time, it took inspiration from the Mini Cooper, which was the first transverse front-wheel drive car. So in 1966, we got the Miura, which is regarded as one of the prettiest cars of all time, and I still think it is. I've never seen one. I think they're absolutely gorgeous. And they produced 764 over the, 7-year run, most of them being the P400S. Designed by Marcello Gandini. It had an aluminum and steel, mostly riveted together body. It had a box steel chassis. It did have center lock wheels, which is pretty cool for a 1966 road car. But the interesting thing is that it was a transverse V12, which we have not seen before or since. That's it. It's just the Miura. And then after that, we got some weird cars that most people forget about when you think about the history of the V12 Lamborghini.
Well, one of them is, I think, looks better than the Miura. One of them, I think, looks better than the Countach, but for some reason it just gets no love. But we'll get to that when we get to it.
Hold up. Nick's out here speaking nonsense. Most people generally jump from the early GT cars to the Miura to the Countach, and they forget that there were 3 cars in between, being the Espada, the Islero, and the Giorama, I believe is how it is pronounced, or Giorama. Italian, did I get that right? Did I get it wrong?
I believe you got it right. I think
banned
so.
from Italy. Fantastic. Okay, so which one?
Well, maybe for other reasons.
Well, probably. So, which one are you incorrect about saying is better looking than a Miura?
The Islero.
Okay, so the Islero is a good-looking car.
I love the pop-ups. I love the nose. I love the headlights under the rear bumper. I love the quad exhaust, and I love the fact that it's a front-engine V12.
It looks very like a Lotus Elan to me.
It looks like a stretched, it looks like a stretched Italian Lotus Elan, yeah.
Yeah.
But I like it. Here's the thing. The Countach is only as popular as it is because it came about and it pioneered at a time when nothing like that had been seen. So, granted, it was revolutionary.
Right.
Outside of that, looking back on it, I think it is a supremely underwhelming car. That's neither here nor there because we're not here to argue about the Countach. But
this is true.
The Miura, while I think beautiful, I think is over. There's plenty of things on the car that I'm like, that's not as pretty or as cool. I don't know. I don't know. It's just like, it's a beautiful car. Like, is it more beautiful than a regular 60s 911?
Yes.
Marginally, but yes. But I think the Acelero, maybe the Acelero is just more my style. Maybe that's more of what it is. This is not that it's more objectively beautiful,
right?
But the Acelero just speaks my language, and I don't know why.
And I do feel like the Espada, Acelero, and Hurama, which we will have pictures of up here and several of them. I think of the three, the Acelero is the best looking for sure.
The Hurama I really like. It's just
it is good. It's not better than a Miura and a Countach.
Well, it looks like a slightly uglier Acelero. It looks like an uglier later Acelero.
Right.
The Espada, I got to remind myself which one this is because I used to remember all these.
You don't need to remember the Espada that much.
I think I do, actually. Okay, no, so I think the Espada is overhated. I don't think it's better looking than any of the ones that we talked about. I do think it's better looking than the Maserati Bora. And I think it's better looking than a lot of contemporary Italian cars. But obviously, compared to the Mira, it's not nearly as pretty. Correct. I think if it had a slightly more raked roofline, that car looks better than the Countach.
I'm assuming you've seen a Mira, just because it's you.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
They are tiny in person.
I imagine
they are a minuscule car.
Yeah.
Take a modern Lotus Elise and then make it a little bit lower and longer, and you have a Mira. I don't actually know what the actual heights are, but I definitely remember sitting next to a Mira and being like, "Oh my god, it's below my waist."
Right. Have you seen either an Espada, Acelero, or a Hurama? Have you seen any of those before?
I've seen an Acelero, and I want to say I've seen an Espada. I don't know about the Hurama.
So I've only seen an Espada of these older 5 cars we've talked about so far, and it was, I think, a very good-looking car. But then we get to 1974. And 1974 is really when Lamborghini, I think, starts to take off. Now, we're not going directly into Lamborghini history here because we did skip a couple cars. So in 1974, we got the Countach, the definitive supercars. The start of all of it, mid-engined, V12, angular, wedge shape. It started the whole thing. This is where the supercar started.
Listen, there's 2 people in this podcast, and I am going to talk about how
one of them is wrong.
I'm going to talk about how looks, performance, in all categories, it is worse than a 930. It just is.
No, it is. You're correct.
Right.
I would take one over a 930. Actually, I'd take one over, I think, every Porsche ever built.
That's not even remotely true. If someone offered you a Lamborghini Countach or a Carrera GT, you would take the Carrera GT every day of the week.
I don't think I would.
We're talking about...
It's a Countach.
Ben, it is a poorly constructed...
Yes.
It
is. It is poorly constructed. It was built by tractor makers. There were approximately 37 packs of cigarettes smoked for every Countach built. You can't fathom the amount of espresso that was drank in the production of the Countach. You're Italian, you probably can. But I just think it's the coolest looking thing ever. I really want one. And I want an LP 400. I want the pre-wing car. I want the non-box flares wing car. I just think it's the coolest looking thing.
Wow, so not only would you take the Countach over the Carrera GT, you would take the wrong Countach over the Carrera GT.
Yeah, I would take a Countach over your V10 Boxster, yeah.
My V10 Boxster? Lord knows I wish I had one. I would take an actual V10 986, too.
Anyway, this show isn't about Porsches today.
Not yet, but when I get one, it will be. Let me tell you what, boy.
1974, we got the Lamborghini Countach, the definitive supercar, the start of what we know as the modern supercar. It is a longitudinal V12, the first of its kind. And the interesting thing to note is it is longitudinal V12. The transmission is mounted in front of the motor, not behind it, despite the fact that it is rear-wheel drive. Designed by Paolo Stanzini. It is a steel chassis and a steel body. They're actually kind of heavy for what they are.
Yeah, and they made all of how much horsepower?
370 if you got the spicy one.
Well, if you got the spicy one.
Sorry, the Quattro Valvole, which is the greatest car name ever, 414 horsepower.
Yeah, but that was from 85 to 90. That's 11 years after it launched. What did it make on launch in 74?
350 or 370.
And it weighed how much?
Oh, probably a lot. I don't know.
All right, you can keep talking. I'm going to do some research.
Let me know how much an LP400 weighs, but it weighs less than a 4th gen Camaro and makes more power than a 4th gen Camaro.
That's not what we're talking about.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, well, I guess.
But they made 1,900 Countaches between 1974 and 1990 with the LP400, which was a 4-liter quad-cam V12. Note, this is still based off of that now 11-year-old 3.5-liter V12 from the 350 GT. And then they bumped to the LP400S, which is another 4-liter, but it is what people recognize as the Countach. That's the box flares, the big wing. That's the car everyone recognizes. That's what the majority of them are. And then we go to the LP500S, which is not a 5-liter. It's a 4.8-liter quad-cam V12, still fitted with six carburetors, 6 2-barrel carburetors to be exact. That car was making 375. And then we go to what is really the definitive Countach, the LP5000 Quattro Valvole, which is one of the greatest names ever. They made 610 cars in a 5-year run period between 85 and 90. That engine is now a 5.2-liter with 4 valves per cylinder, hence the Quattro Valvole. Also, they were offered with either carburetors making 449 horsepower, that was the most powerful Countach you could get, or 414 horsepower with a Bosch K-Jetronic fuel injection system. Only 66 of the 610 cars were fuel injected. And then the final Countach, which some people love, some people hate. I'm personally on the fence about it. I don't generally like them, but that is the 25th anniversary car, and that is actually the highest production model of Countach at 657. That was a 2-year run period, and that car is designed by Horatio Pagani, and they were only fitted with that K-Jetronic fuel injection. And they were the fastest Countach ever made because they were more aerodynamic, less wedgy, more slipstream. They did 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds and a top speed of 183, which is pretty dang impressive for something designed in probably 1970. Now, the weirdest V12 Lamborghini ever is, for sure, without a doubt, the Rambo Lambo, the LM002. Those were produced from 86 to 93. I could do a 3-hour-long episode on the LM002 and the BMW M1 and all that controversy and all that. They only made 328. They were all steel frame with a riveted aluminum body. They came with that 5.2-liter V12 out of the Quattro Valvole, or a 7.2-liter V12 that Lamborghini made to put in boats, and that made 720 horsepower. They were only available with a 5-speed manual. Nick, have you ever seen an LM002?
I don't even know what that would look like, if I'm going to be honest.
Nick, how do you not know what an LM002 is?
Beats me. Let me look it up.
Oh my gosh. Nick, where have you been?
Oh,
you
the
were
truck. The truck.
Yes, it's
yes,
the coolest
I've seen one.
thing. Okay.
Ridiculous.
I'm very upset. I really want to see an LM002. And then we get towards the modern era of Lamborghini. It is now 1990. We have released the Diablo. Now, there's been a shift of ownership just at the end of the Countach. There's 2 essentially French playboys that now run Lamborghini, and they decided that we need to replace the Countach, and they come out with the Diablo. And this is when we get into Lamborghini and making 150 bajillion different submodels of every model. So there was like 13 different Diablos you could buy. It was the highest production run of any car thus far. They made 2,884 in an 11-year run period between 1990 and 2001. The highest production of those being the Mark I cars. That is a Diablo VT. Designed by Marcello Gandini, which designed the Countach and the Mira, so keeping Gandini around. They came with either a 5.7-liter V12 that was offered from 90 to 2000, or a 6-liter V12, and you could get that in 99 or 2000 if you got the GT or the VT60. that 5.7 liter V12, mind, still derived from that 3.5 liter designed in 1963. That 5.7 liter made anywhere from 485 to 595 horsepower. That 6 liter made 550 or 575 if you got the VT. Both were available with rear wheel drive or all wheel drive, but you could only get a 5-speed manual. So in 2001, we are now in the 2000s, which means it is time for a new V12 Lamborghini, and we have come out with the Murcielago. It is not Murcielago, it is not Murcielago, it is Murcielago. 4,099 were produced, 50 of which were 40th anniversary. There were 899 Roadsters. The number on Murcielagos is actually kind of weird because they were partially owned by Chrysler at that point. Like, ownership switched about halfway through the Murcielago, so people don't quite know how much of all of them they made. So Ed Bolian from VinWiki over the past couple of years, he's owned like 6 or so Murcielagos at this point. He's been working with Lamborghini to figure out how many of each one there are, and turns out like manual LP670 or LP640 Roadsters, there's all of like 30, which Lamborghini didn't know. They just only built as many as were ordered. So that Murcielagos are pretty interesting cars. All of them are all-wheel drive. You could get them with either a 6-speed gated manual or a 6-speed E-gear. This is the first time an automatic was offered in a V12 Lamborghini. So the first gen Murcielagos had a 6.2 with the coupes and the roadsters. Those were made from 2001 to 2006. And then we went to the LP640. This is a big shift in Lamborghini. First time they've used the LP nomenclature. That stands for longitudinal posterior. Now, technically, yes, that just means the engine is behind you and it faces front to back. To be fair, technically all V12 Lamborghinis from the Countach up until this point were longitudinal posterior, excluding the L and 002. But they didn't use that nomenclature. So now they do, and that was the big shift in the Murcielagos. It wasn't as big of a shift as the 5.7 to 6-liter cars in the Diablo, but it's still a big shift. Interesting thing to note that I found very interesting as I was doing the research for this episode, the 6.5-liter V12, which is what you got in the LP640, was the least efficient car in 2008, according to the EPA, with a factory fuel mileage of 13 miles per gallon. And then we went to the LP640 Roadster, which same thing, had that 6.5-liter V12 making 631 horsepower. And then we had the SVs. They brought back the SV nomenclature. We had SVs for the Diablo and for the Miura. Now, this had that 6.5-liter V12, but it was now making 661 horsepower, and it was 220 pounds lighter. And those are the most expensive, the most rare. Like the manual SV, they made all of 10. So that is the holy grail of V12 Lamborghinis to most people. And then we got to the oldest car known to man, the Lamborghini Aventador, which was released in 2011.
And all that, yeah.
And they made several different versions. The J, which is the coolest looking concept car, the LP700, the 700 Roadster, the 720 Anniversary Roadster, the S Roadster, the SV, the SV Roadster, SVJ and Roadster, the Ultimate, and the Ultimate Roadster.
I don't think they made enough of them.
I don't think they did. They made just shy of 12,000 Aventadors, which I was actually surprised by. I didn't know that the numbers were that high, but they made 11,465 of them.
That's almost as many pounds as that stupid BMW SUV.
Yes. So that's still a dumb car. But they made 11,465, most of which were the standard LP 700-4 cars. That is a normal, not weird. That's just an Aventador.
You walked into the Lambo dealership and they had one on the floor.
Said, I want an Aventador, and you bought an Aventador. They made 5,000 of those. They actually only made a fifth of those. They made 1,075 Roadsters. Actually, if you see an Aventador Roadster, it's kind of a rare vehicle. And those were a 6.5-liter V12 making 690 to 770 horsepower, and they were all 7-speed automated manuals. Now, something to remember, longitudinal posterior. Motor is behind you, facing front to back, and that automatic transmission is going forward, drive shaft to the front axle, and then drive shaft back to the rear axle. We do have some special cars, some not one-offs, but limited production rebodied cars. So there's the Rebenton, which was Murcielago-based, and the Rebenton Roadster. They made all of like 50 of those. And then on the Aventador, they made about 1 million specials. So they made the Veneno, which is, I think, the rarest V12 Lamborghini you can buy. The Centenario, which I think looks fantastic. The Sion, which I think looks horrible. The Asenza SC V12, which is a dumb race car that has no purpose. And the Countach, which might be the worst looking Lamborghini of all time, is the new Countach. Moving on to present day, we have probably the biggest shift in a Lamborghini V12 car since the Miura to the Countach, and it is the Lamborghini Revuelto. Nick, Patty, I'm assuming you've seen pictures, you've seen stats, you've seen figures, you've formed opinions.
I've seen
thoughts,
photos,
questions, comments, and concerns.
Well, I don't know if you want all that. I really don't like how the Lamborghini design philosophy lately has been to just bring up the diffuser as much as possible, up like above the rear half shafts. Like it just keeps bringing it. Like if you look at the rear end photo that I'm looking at, the center of that diffuser is almost to the top of the rear wheels, which are probably 21s or 22s. It is absurd. I just think it's ridiculous. If anything, just bring the back down lower. I think the interior looks like every other Lambo interior. I think it looks like, I think they could do a better job of making it look Spartan than they do. It just kind of, God, I don't know. I know this sounds horrible, but they just all look like tiny evolutions of the same thing. And I wasn't really a fan of the Aventador. Not the Aventador itself. I think the Aventador looked good. But the whole, like, interior design of it, wasn't really for me. And then the Huracan wasn't, but, like, it's not slightly changing kind of back towards where I would be like, ooh, that's a good looking interior. It's just going further the opposite. Kind of the same thing with the McLaren interiors, where it's like, we're going to have some plastics that curve and swoop, and then there's going to be a screen kind of hidden. I don't know. It looks kind of ridiculous to me.
That is what people want now, so.
Well, but it's not doing it for the sake of being, like, ergonomic. It's just kind of, it needs to be artsy. It needs to be more
whimsical, and you've got to have the floating screen, and you've got to have
I think it's
a million touch screens.
I do think the front lights look hot. I think the front lower diffuser looks cool. Yep. Or the lower valence. I don't like the carved sculpting in the front end up towards the windshield above the headlight. I'm looking at that front three-quarter shot. I think it's just kind of useless, honestly. If that was all flat. I also don't like, they need to get rid of the little spine ridge up the very front center of the nose, because that's been in every Lambo since, like you said, 2011.
Right.
Like, it's just Reventon, Aventador, all this stuff. I feel like while they can maintain larger design philosophies like a roofline, like the proportions of where the doors and the driver sits compared to the rest of the car, but like the little, like a line here, a ridge here, stuff like that, it's kind of getting tiresome for me. I think it's too recycled. Coming into the shots of the orange one you have down at the bottom of this the Google Doc. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the difference is with the one on the top to the one on the bottom, but I like. The one on the top has Huracan headlights. What's the one on the top?
The one on the top is the Huracan Technica. That is the current top of the line Huracan, and the reason why I brought it up is
because it looks very similar.
A lot of the design philosophy carried over with the kind of fangs that they have.
So you know
from
what's
the
interesting?
Up.
So
yes.
my favorite part of this car of the Revuelto is the side intakes. I think that looks mega. I think it looks awesome.
Looks really good.
But the front end, the more I'm looking at it, it looks like the it's not the McLaren Elva, or maybe it is. What's the non-Elva McLaren that's brand new McLaren
Artura?
Yes, it looks like a McLaren Artura, does it not?
Yeah, it does.
But you can get an Artura for a lot less.
Artura doesn't have a 9,500 RPM V12 though.
Well, right, but I'm not going to lie. I'm looking at a front three-quarter shot of the Artura. The Artura definitely looks a little bit more tame. It does not look that much different from a front three-quarter shot.
Right. So this is what I wanted to bring up. This car looks good. I like how this looks. However, I don't know that it's enough. I don't know if it's different enough from an Aventador to be a whole new model.
And I know you don't like the new Countach, but in terms of the
and to be
variation,
fair, to clear up real quick for people, it's not that I don't like it. I do think it looks good. I just don't like that it's called Countach. That's all. Carry
Well,
on.
okay, so actually this may be the same point. I actually like that it's called Countach, but let's say Lambo never came out with that car.
Right.
And they just said, we're going to do a retro 70s, 80s wedge design to kind of be the rebirth of our supercar with a whole new ground-up platform. And it could be the identical body. If they just never said, we're making a new Countach, this is the new Countach.
Right. If they released that as this car.
People would be like, oh, man, you know what they did is they took lines from their 70s and 80s supercars and they reimagined it into this whatever. Right. That would be more rewarding than this tired... Because here's the thing, is at a point, I think they've already run out of things to change, but at a point, it's going to get so drastic and extreme, they won't be able to make it functional for cooling or for the placement of the engine or for whatever.
This is something that I've always thought for years now, is it's at some point, because cars become so much more about a tenth here, shaving a gram there, you know, a tenth of a mile per gallon here, right? Eventually, like, because everyone designs cars in wind tunnels now, this car was designed in a wind tunnel for days upon days, I imagine. Like, eventually, all cars just will look the same. Whereas, because the reason why this styling kind of bothers me is if you look at Miura to Countach, shares nothing. If you look at Countach...
that's exactly what I was going to say.
If you look at Countach to Diablo, it's like, okay, mid-engine V12, but nothing the same, other than doors that go up. If you look at Diablo to Murcielago, shares nothing. We went from a very curvy wedge to a very, like, Darth Vader-y angular wedge. And then if you look at Mercy to Aventador, there's a bit more similarities, but not a lot. It's very hard to look at a Mercy and an Aventador and compare the two. If you look at an Aventador and this parked next to each other, like if you put all the Aventadors, the Aventador, the S, the SVJ, the Ultima, and then this at right, and then but if you put this at the end, if you lined them all up in chronological order and then put this at the end, you'd be like, oh cool, that's the newest one. That's the new Aventador.
So I was just looking back to refresh my memory. So let's compare this to the 458, 488, and the F8. Mm-hmm. You have the Ferraris being mid-engine. And here's the thing, is the Ferraris look probably more similar across the three generations than I would necessarily want. But the thing with Ferrari is they're not making such a cataclysmic change mechanically. And Ferrari, I assume after the F8 or maybe even after the next generation mid-engine supercar, will do something. I mean, even the 296 is quite a variation, but obviously the 296 is under the F8. Their next mid-engine supercar...
The 296 replaces the F8.
Oh, does it?
Yes.
Okay. So
that's something that most people didn't know, is it was F8 and then SF90 and then all the V12 stuff, is that 296 replaces F8. Ferrari didn't technically announce that. They just announced that they were building the 296 and then just stopped building the F8.
So let's use that as a reference. So the 296, I think, is more stunning than any Ferrari they made in the last, 15 years.
Correct.
But here's the thing. So Ferrari completely changed their design philosophy for it. So if you look at this compared to an F8, and obviously you know this, but for the listeners, you have a completely different exhaust. You have a completely different rear end. You go from round to more square lights. You go to, rather than having the scoops on the side be kind of down in the fender, these are up on the rear shoulders of the car.
Right.
You have an entirely different front end where rather than it being kind of split off grills in the front, it's this one big mouth. Instead of the lights being down in the front and curving up towards the fender, these are just angled. You have, which this is my favorite feature on this car, very, very unique to this car and reminiscent of the 246 Dino, is the flat rear window in the back with the struts that come down, not actually struts, but the bodywork that frames it on either side and creates almost like what you've seen on a 917 or a Ferrari 512S, which is that open kind of area right behind where the drivers sit. There is that I'm having a hard time finding, other than it being mid-engined, anything on this car that's a direct carryover from the 458, 488, or the F8, as opposed to on this Lamborghini, what you have that's a direct carryover, even from the Huracan Technica, whatever, makes it actually more damning. This car, other than headlights, is the Huracan Technica, mixed with Sion, mixed with Artura, but it's not so much of one of them that you like, oh, it's a much new and improved version of X.
Right.
If you told me that this car was the new Huracan Technica Ultime, I'd be like, oh, yeah, no, for sure.
Sure.
But if you put a 296 next to an F8, you'd be like, wow, those are totally different.
Right. Like a 296 and an F8, the thing is if you put the two next to each other, it's like, obviously there is similar design language going on, but you have to look at them to connect them, whereas you could walk past an Aventador or a Huracan parked next to this thing and be like, yep, that's the same company, for sure. And, like, we're not saying that this is bad. This is good. It's just for the new V12 model. It is what Lamborghini does. It's what they're known for. It's their new flagship car.
Right.
It looks a bit like a car that came out in 2011, which I think is a bit of a problem. Now, granted, they're going to come out with an S and an SVJ and an Ultima, and there's going to be 50 different models of it, and it's going to be a whole thing. And I'm sure they'll look awesome. I am going to run through the specs on the Revuelto real quick. So it does have so it has a 6.5 liter naturally aspirated V12, which if you listen to me talk about the Aventador, that might sound familiar. However, it is a completely new V12. It's like, I heard it's like 50 kilograms lighter or something than the old V12, which is super impressive.
Can you say that in freedom, please?
50 kilograms lighter. It makes 814 naturally aspirated horsepower, because it is 12.6 to 1 compression. It's over square bore, which means it's a 95 millimeter bore, 76.4 millimeter stroke. It revs to 9,500 RPM, which is an ungodly amount. Like, that is a stupid amount. And it's also a hybrid, which is a first for a normal production model. The Sion and the Countach are also both hybrids, but not in this way. Those were both mechanical four-wheel drive vehicles with a hybrid boost. This is a all-wheel drive system. So it's got two electric motors up front, one on each corner. They're super impressive. They only weigh, I think they're sub 100 pounds each. They make 190 horsepower they make 190 horsepower 190 horsepower up front. It has a 3.8 kilowatt hour battery, which is tiny. If you don't know what that means, that is the size of the battery, the actual electricity capacity of it. For reference, Model S Plaid is 100 kilowatt hours. So this is 3.8% of the size of a Model S Plaid battery. Which means with a normal wall charger, you can charge it in 30 minutes. Or if it's dead, you can charge it using that 9,500 RPM glorious V12 in 7 minutes. Yes.
A Model Plaid doesn't have a V12, so...
Doesn't have a 9,500
Honestly,
RPM V12.
you can keep it.
It makes a combined 1,001 horsepower, which I'm assuming means that it makes like 1,200 horsepower, and then they just tuned it down so that you can daily a 9,500 RPM V12, and it
Except
won't
nobody's
kill
going to
itself.
daily this, so you know.
There is that. But the big talking point is that it has an 8-speed dual-clutch transmission. They've gone away from the 7-speed single-clutch, 8-speed dual-clutch. It's transverse-mounted, which means motor front to back, transmission side to side. And they did that so that they can mount the battery where the trans tunnel would be on an Aventador between the two seats. And instead of having a longitudinal transaxle, like in... like a Ferrari or something, if they make it transverse, it pushes the center of gravity in, which is good considering this is a 3,900-pound car.
So when there's an electrical fire, it'll start right between you and your partner.
Yeah. Kneecaps,
okay, no,
right
perfect.
there. Yep,
Yeah,
good
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Okay. You don't need those anyway.
No. So some wheel specs. It's on 20 by 9.5 front wheels. That's a 265, 35, 20 up front, and it's on 21 by 12s in the rear. That's a 345, 30, 21. I believe they are running Bridgestone tires because it's Lamborghini and they have some weird deal with Bridgestones. Put Pirellis or Michelins on it, people. Chassis, it is a all-new carbon fiber monocoque chassis. It shares nothing with the Aventador. And the other big talking point is it has a all-new forged composites front structure. So on the Aventador and most carbon fiber monocoque chassis road vehicles, it is the carbon monocoque, which is the roof, the front and rear firewalls, and the floor in the A and B pillars, basically. And then they bolt aluminum subframes onto them. This has a carbon fiber front, or a forged carbon front structure on it, which is super cool. It weighs 3,900 pounds dry. The Aventador was 3,400 pounds dry. I think that number was from 2011. And Italian automakers were kind of finicky about their numbers then. I've seen numbers as high as 3,600 pounds. It's not that much heavier considering it's all new and a hybrid.
Right.
It is 3 inches longer in wheelbase, which I find quite surprising considering it's a hybrid and there is no mechanical connection between the engine and the front wheels. They could have made it as short as they wanted to. However, you do have to sadly fit people in there. However, it is the same track.
Damn people.
It is the same track with front and rear. Nick, that is all I have to say about the Lamborghini Revuelto. I think that's going to do it for episode 47 of the Clutch Dump. Hopefully you're listening to this on Wednesday the 5th? 4th. What day is that? Oh, no.
It's a day. It's the 4th.
The 4th. Well, hopefully you're listening to this on April the 4th on YouTube or any of those platforms that Nick talked about earlier. If you are on one of those audio platforms, make sure you go give us a follow, whether it's Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Pandora, Apple, and Google Podcasts. We are there. Drop us a follow, give us a rating, and a review. It helps us reach a bigger audience. If you're watching this on YouTube, thank you so very much. Make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like, and share this video. It helps us reach a bigger, better audience. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. This has been episode 47 of The Clutch Dump. We'll see you next time.